What happens when the man who threw you away is forced to watch you become everything he ever wanted to be? This isn't a fairy tale. It's the story of Damien Vance, a man who paraded his new life like a trophy, convinced he'd discarded a worthless trinket. He publicly humiliated his ex-wife, Caroline Abbott, believing she was nothing without him. But he made one fatal mistake: he never bothered to look at what she was truly capable of. He was so busy celebrating his victory, he never saw the tidal wave of her ambition gathering strength right under his nose. Get ready, because you are about to witness the moment his entire world didn't just crumble, it was spectacularly obliterated by the one person he thought he had already destroyed. The divorce papers felt like sheets of ice in Caroline Abbott's hands, the sharp legalistic font a stark contrast to the soft, rounded life she had painstakingly built. Their lawyer, a man whose tailored suit probably cost more than her first car, slid them across the polished mahogany table of Damien's home office. His office. It had once been their study, a shared space where she'd helped him prep for his bar exam late into the night, armed with flashcards and endless cups of coffee. Now it was his domain, a monument to his success, decorated with abstract art. She loathed and framed accolades that only told half the story. "It's a very generous offer," Caroline Damien said, his voice laced with the patronizing calm he used when explaining things he assumed were beyond her comprehension. He leaned back in his leather chair, a king surveying his conquered territory. "More than generous, in fact. My legal team thinks I'm insane." Caroline looked at the figure. It was on the surface a substantial sum. Enough to buy a comfortable new life, enough to silence any accusations of cruelty. But it was a calculated generosity. It was severance pay. It was the price of her silence, the cost of her quiet disappearance from his ascendant life. It was a golden cage designed to keep her comfortable but contained forever a footnote in the grand story of Damien Vance. "It's not about the money, Damien," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at his face, searching for a flicker of the man she had married, the ambitious but kind boy she'd met in college. There was none. His features, once handsome and open, had hardened with success, his eyes holding the flat, predatory sheen of a shark. "Oh, please," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "It's always about the money. Don't try to take the moral high ground now. It doesn't suit you." The real issue wasn't on the papers. The real issue was currently redecorating their master bedroom and posting about it on Instagram. Jenna Reed, a 20-something marketing coordinator from his firm with bright eyes, a rapacious ambition that mirrored his own, and a complete lack of shame. Caroline had discovered their affair not through a clandestine phone call or a lipstick-stained collar, but through the cold, impersonal evidence of a credit card statement. A charge for a suite at the St. Regis on a night he was supposedly on a business trip to Chicago. A boutique receipt for lingerie in a size she had never worn. When she confronted him, he didn't even have the decency to lie. He'd simply looked at her, his expression one of mild annoyance, as if she were a household appliance that had inconveniently malfunctioned. "We've grown apart, Caroline," he'd said, the ultimate cliché falling from his lips with unnerving sincerity. "I need someone who understands my world, who can keep up. Jenna. She gets it. She gets me." What he meant was that Jenna was an accessory, a beautiful, compliant ornament that reflected his own success back at him. Caroline, with her quiet intelligence and her mid-level analyst job at Sterling Thorne Capital, was a relic of his past. She was the starter wife, the supportive behind-the-scenes woman who had edited his essays, managed their home, and sacrificed her own career ambitions so he could chase his. He had reached the summit and decided the climbing partner who helped him get there was now dead weight. Now in the office, he tapped an impatient finger on the table. "Just sign it, Caroline. Let's not drag this out. It's for the best." She picked up the expensive fountain pen he'd offered. Its weight felt obscene in her hand. For a decade, her signature had been intertwined with his on mortgages, on tax returns, on holiday cards. This would be the last time. As the nib scratched across the paper, she felt a profound and hollow ache. It wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the erasure of a life. She had poured herself into the vessel of their relationship, and now that it was shattered, she wasn't sure what, if anything, was left of her own form. He smiled a tight, triumphant curl of his lips. Good. That's settled. He stood up, smoothing down his tie. The movers will be here on Friday. I'd appreciate it if you could have your personal effects packed by then. Jenna is keen to refresh the decor. The casual cruelty of it was a physical blow. He wasn't just divorcing her, he was evicting her from her own memories. He watched her, expecting tears, a scene, a final pathetic plea. But Caroline felt something else crystallizing in the pit of her stomach, something cold and hard and sharp. It was a nascent form of rage, too exhausted to be fiery, but dense as a diamond. She stood her back straight and placed the pen neatly beside the signed documents. She didn't look at him. She looked at the city skyline visible through the large window behind him, a panorama of power and ambition. His view. "You're right, Damien," she said, her voice suddenly clear and steady. "This is for the best." She walked out of the room, out of the house, and out of the life that had been her entire world. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Behind her, the door clicked shut, the sound echoing like a final definitive judgment. The weeks that followed the signing were a masterclass in public humiliation. Damien and Jenna seemed to be on a mission to scorch the earth of Caroline's old life, salting it with their new, vibrant happiness. Their relationship wasn't just public. It was a curated, relentless social media campaign. There was Jenna wearing a bikini on the balcony of their old vacation condo in Miami, captioning it "Paradise with my king." There was Damien grinning at a Michelin star restaurant they had been on a waiting list for months, with Jenna's hand adorned with a new ostentatious ring resting on his. They systematically colonized every memory, every special place. The small Italian bistro where he had proposed, they were there clinking champagne glasses in an Instagram story. The park where they used to walk their golden retriever, a new post of them with a fluffy designer puppy hashtagged "New Beginnings." It was psychological warfare, and Caroline was the sole target. Her friends, particularly her closest confidant Olivia, were furious on her behalf. "He's a monster, Caroline. A narcissistic ghoul. You need to block him. Block her. Block everyone who even knows them." Caroline tried. She deactivated her accounts, but the images still found their way to her through well-meaning but clumsy friends who would say things like, "You'll never believe what that pig posted now." Each new picture was a fresh stab, a reminder of her replacement. She felt like a ghost haunting the periphery of a life that was once hers, watching someone else live it louder, brighter, and seemingly better. She moved into a small, sterile apartment across town. The silence was deafening. The generous settlement felt like blood money, and she tried to spend as little of it as possible, as if to do so would be to accept his narrative that she was bought and paid for. She threw herself into her work at Sterling Thorne Capital, a massive investment firm, where her role as a senior financial analyst had always been a quiet background hum to Damien's bombastic legal career. The complex algorithms and market trend analyses were a welcome refuge. In the clean, logical world of numbers, there was no room for heartbreak. There was only data patterns and outcomes. The true nadir, the moment of absolute soul-crushing humiliation, came 2 months later. It was the annual Children's Hospital Foundation Gala, the premier philanthropic event of the city's elite. For years, she and Damien had attended together. She'd spent weeks choosing a dress, and he would charm the room, a formidable power couple. This year, her invitation, addressed solely to Ms. Caroline Abbott, had sat on her counter for a week before Olivia had bullied her into going. "You cannot let him win," Olivia had insisted, zipping up the back of Caroline's simple but elegant navy blue gown. "You cannot let him think he has successfully erased you from this city. Hold your head high and let him see that you are fine." But she wasn't fine. The moment she walked into the grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel, she felt a crippling wave of social anxiety. The cavernous space, dripping with crystals and smelling of lilies and wealth, was a landscape of her old life. Faces turned, conversations paused, and she could feel the pitying glances and whispered gossip like a physical touch. And then she saw them. Damien stood near the champagne fountain looking impossibly handsome in a custom tuxedo. On his arm was Jenna, poured into a sequined fire engine red dress that was designed to command attention. They were laughing, holding court, the gravitational center of the room. As if sensing her presence, Damien's eyes scanned the crowd and landed directly on her. For a heartbeat, his smile faltered, but it was quickly replaced by a smirk of pure, unadulterated arrogance. He saw her standing alone, a solitary figure in a sea of couples, and he saw an opportunity. Taking Jenna's hand, he began to walk towards her, parting the crowd like a shark gliding through water. Caroline's blood ran cold. She wanted to turn, to flee, to disappear into the floorboards, but her feet were rooted to the spot, trapped by the tractor beam of his ego. "Caroline, I'm so surprised to see you out," he said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. The implication was clear. "I thought you'd be at home crying into a pint of ice cream." He gestured to the woman on his arm. "You know my partner Jenna Reed, of course." Jenna gave her a small, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes. It was a victor's smile. "It's so nice to finally meet you properly," she said, her voice sweet as poison. The small crowd around them had fallen into a voyeuristic silence. It was a car crash, and no one could look away. A portly man named Mr. Harrington, a senior partner at a rival law firm, clapped Damien on the back. "Vance, you dog," he chortled. "Always trading up." Damien beamed, soaking in the crude compliment. And then he delivered the killing blow. He looked at Caroline, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph, and said to Mr. Harrington, "This is my ex-wife Caroline. She's an analyst over at Sterling Thorne. A very dedicated employee. Always good with the numbers." The condescension was suffocating. He had reduced her entire identity to a bland corporate descriptor, positioning her as the sensible, boring brown wren next to his vibrant bird of paradise. He was publicly framing their history, casting himself as the dynamic man who had outgrown his quiet, uninteresting wife. In that moment, under the blaze of the chandeliers, something inside Caroline snapped. The grief and the hurt that had been churning within her for months suddenly cooled, hardened and sharpened into a single lethal point. It was the humiliation that did it. The sheer, unvarnished cruelty of his need to not just win, but to see her utterly defeated. She looked at him, at his smug face, at Jenna's triumphant smirk, at the curious, pitying eyes of the onlookers. And she felt no more pain. The emotional connection, the last lingering thread of the love she'd once had for him, was finally irrevocably severed. All that remained was a vast, cold emptiness, and in the center of that void, a single burning ember of resolve. She gave him a smile. It was a small, tight, unreadable thing. "It was a pleasure seeing you both," she said, her voice as even as a frozen lake. "Do enjoy your evening." Without another word, she turned and walked away, her spine as straight as a steel rod. She didn't run. She didn't falter. She walked through the crowd, past the pitying stares, and out of the ballroom. She didn't stop until she was outside in the cool night air. She didn't cry. The time for tears was over. He had wanted to see her break. Instead, he had just witnessed her being forged. The gala was a baptism by fire. Caroline walked away from that night a different woman. The part of her that had hoped for reconciliation, that had grieved the loss of her marriage, was gone, cauterized by the heat of public humiliation. In its place was a quiet, relentless focus. Damien had defined her by her job, so her job would become her salvation. She arrived at the Sterling Thorne Capital offices before the sun rose and left long after it had set. Her small gray cubicle became her sanctuary and her command center. She channeled all her pain, anger, and grief into her work, transforming raw emotion into fuel. Her colleagues, used to the competent but reserved Caroline, began to notice a change. Her contributions in meetings became sharper, her analyses more incisive. She wasn't just processing data anymore. She was interrogating it, forcing it to reveal secrets and opportunities others had missed. Her focus narrowed onto a project that had been languishing in development for months. Project Chimera. It was an ambitious, high-risk proposal to restructure the firm's portfolio by divesting from traditional stable assets and aggressively acquiring stakes in emerging fintech and sustainable energy startups. The current CEO, a risk-averse man named Robert Morrison, who was nearing retirement, had all but shelved it, deeming it too radical. Most analysts agreed, seeing it as a career killer. But Caroline saw potential. She spent her nights and weekends tearing Chimera apart and rebuilding it. She ran thousands of simulations, stress-tested every variable, and built complex models that forecasted not just potential profits, but entire market shifts. She found the fatal flaw in the original proposal. It was too broad. She refined it, identifying a specific, undervalued niche in the green tech sector that was poised for explosive growth. It was a surgical strike, not a blitzkrieg. Her work did not go unnoticed. Alistair Finch, a semi-retired board member who still kept an office on the executive floor, was a quiet legend at the firm. He was a kingmaker known for his uncanny ability to spot talent. He had a habit of wandering the lower floors after hours, a ghost in a bespoke suit. One evening he saw the light on in Caroline's cubicle. He stood silently in the doorway for a moment, watching her. Her face was illuminated by the glow of 3 monitors, each displaying a dizzying array of charts and code. She was utterly absorbed, her focus absolute. "Burning the midnight oil, Mrs. Abbott?" he asked, his voice a gentle, gravelly rumble. Caroline jumped, startled. "Mr. Finch, I'm sorry I didn't see you. It's Caroline, isn't it?" "Please call me Alistair." He gestured toward her screen. "What has your undivided attention?" Hesitantly at first, and then with growing confidence, she explained her work on Project Chimera. She didn't just show him the numbers. She told him the story they were telling her. She spoke of market trends, regulatory tailwinds, and the shifting paradigms of global investment. She spoke with a passion and clarity that he hadn't heard from anyone at the firm in years. Alistair listened, his expression unreadable. He asked a few sharp, probing questions which she answered without hesitation, backing up every assertion with data. When she was finished, he simply nodded. "Very impressive, Caroline," he said. "Very impressive indeed. You see the whole chessboard, not just the next move. That's a rare quality." He gave her a small, enigmatic smile. "Send me your revised proposal. I'd like to read it." That single conversation was the spark. Alistair became her silent champion. He never offered her overt help, but doors began to open. She was invited to meetings that were previously above her pay grade. Her reports, which once would have been buried under a mountain of paperwork, started landing on the desks of division heads. She was given a small team and a modest budget to develop a pilot program based on her Chimera revisions. It was a test. The firm gave her just enough rope to either hang herself or weave a ladder. She and her team worked tirelessly, fueled by coffee and a shared sense of purpose. They identified a small, struggling solar panel company with brilliant proprietary technology but poor management. Using her model, Caroline structured a deal for a minority stake acquisition that also included placing 2 of Sterling Thorne's operational experts on their board. Within 6 months, the company's stock had tripled. The success of the pilot program sent ripples through the company. Caroline was promoted to Vice President of Strategic Development. She was given a corner office, not as grand as Damien's, but with a view that was all her own. She was no longer Caroline Abbott, the quiet analyst. She was a rising star, a name whispered with a mixture of awe and curiosity in the hallways of Sterling Thorne. She never spoke of her personal life at work. Her divorce, Damien, the humiliation, she buried it all. Her past was irrelevant. The only thing that mattered was the future she was building, one successful trade, one brilliant forecast at a time. She was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. The woman who had left Damien's house feeling erased was now authoring a new story, and it was a story written in the bold, unforgiving language of power and success. While Caroline was ascending, Sterling Thorne Capital was beginning to falter. The firm, once a titan of Wall Street, was stagnating. Its conservative strategies championed by CEO Robert Morrison were failing to keep pace with a rapidly changing financial landscape. Profits were down for the third consecutive quarter. Restless investors were grumbling and the board was growing increasingly anxious. The whispers about Morrison's imminent retirement grew from a murmur to a roar. The hunt for a successor was on. The boardroom on the 50th floor was a place of immense power paneled in dark wood and smelling of old money and new fear. The list of potential CEO candidates was short and predictable. There was David Chen, the aggressive head of the Asian markets division known for his ruthlessness. There was Robert's own hand-picked protege, William Davenport, a company man who represented the safe, uninspired status quo. The board was split. A faction terrified of further losses favored the stability of Davenport. Another, hungry for a return to market dominance, backed Chen's high-risk, high-reward approach. The meetings were tense, deadlocked affairs. It was in one of these stalemates that Alistair Finch finally played his hand. "Gentlemen," he began, his calm voice cutting through the fractious debate. "We are looking at this problem all wrong. We are debating between the fire and the frying pan. One will burn us quickly, the other slowly. Neither will save us." The other board members looked at him intrigued. Alistair rarely spoke at length, but when he did, everyone listened. "We don't need a continuation of the old ways, and we don't need reckless gambling. We need a visionary. We need someone who understands the future because they are already building it. We have that person right here in this building." A few eyebrows were raised. William Davenport shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I am talking," Alistair continued, letting the suspense build about Caroline Abbott. The name was met with a moment of stunned silence followed by a wave of dismissive murmurs. Abbott scoffed a portly board member named Peterson. "The new VP. She's been in management for less than a year. She's a glorified analyst." "She's brilliant," Alistair countered, his voice firm. Her revised Chimera strategy single-handedly created the only profitable new revenue stream this firm has seen in 2 years. Her pilot program yielded a 300% return in 6 months. Her projections on the European carbon credit market were dismissed by all of you as overly optimistic, and they have since been proven to be conservative. She sees things we do not. "She has no leadership experience on this scale," another argued. "The markets will see her as a lightweight. Our stock will plummet. The markets see us as a dinosaur." Alistair retorted, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Appointing someone like Davenport signals we are afraid. Appointing Chen signals we are desperate. Appointing Abbott, that signals we are smart. It signals a fundamental shift. It is a bold strategic move that will electrify the industry." He projected Caroline's performance metrics onto the main screen. The numbers spoke for themselves. Growth, profit, and predictive accuracy that dwarfed every other division in the firm. He followed it with her detailed 5-year plan for Sterling Thorne, a document he had asked her to prepare weeks ago under the guise of a thought exercise. It was a masterpiece of strategic planning, bold, innovative, and meticulously researched. The room fell silent again, the dismissiveness replaced by a grudging curiosity. Alistair had planted a seed of doubt in their convictions. Caroline Abbott, the dark horse, the complete unknown, was suddenly a viable if terrifying option. The debate raged for days. Alistair lobbied tirelessly behind the scenes, having quiet dinners and phone calls appealing to the board members' greed and their fear in equal measure. He framed Caroline as the only person who could navigate the treacherous waters ahead. He was selling them not just a new CEO, but a new identity for the firm. Caroline knew nothing of this. She was consumed with expanding her division, unaware that her name was the subject of the most high-stakes debate in the company's recent history. She was called into a final formal interview with the full board, which she assumed was a formality for a more senior executive role. She walked into the imposing boardroom calm and prepared. They grilled her for 2 hours. They attacked her strategies, questioned her experience, and challenged her vision. They were testing her, looking for any sign of weakness. She met every challenge with poise and irrefutable logic. She never raised her voice, never became defensive. She simply laid out her plan, her data, and her unshakable belief in the future she had mapped out. When she walked out, she was convinced she had failed. The board had been hostile, their questions bordering on accusatory. She went back to her office, a knot of disappointment in her stomach, and buried herself in her work. Up on the 50th floor, the moment she left, Alistair Finch looked around the table. "Well, gentlemen," Peterson, the man who had dismissed her as a glorified analyst, slowly leaned back in his chair. "My God," he breathed. "She's a killer. She's been hiding it behind a spreadsheet." The vote was taken an hour later. It was nearly unanimous. The age of Robert Morrison was over. The era of Caroline Abbott was about to begin. The announcement was scheduled for the following Monday at a firm-wide town hall meeting. An email sent out the Friday before had been intentionally vague, speaking of a major strategic announcement regarding the future leadership of Sterling Thorne Capital. The news of Robert Morrison's retirement had already been leaked to the press, and the speculation about his successor was rampant on Wall Street. The smart money was on William Davenport. The atmosphere in the massive sunlit atrium was electric. Hundreds of employees were packed in, from junior traders to senior partners. A stage had been set up, and a legion of financial journalists and photographers were corralled into a press area, their cameras poised. Damien Vance was there. Sterling Thorne was a key client for his law firm, and his presence was a required bit of networking, a public display of his firm's close relationship with the financial giant. He stood near the front with a few of his colleagues, looking smug and relaxed. Jenna was with him, clinging to his arm, looking slightly bored but enjoying the spectacle of power. For Damien, this was just another day at the office, schmoozing, being seen, and reinforcing his place in the city's power structure. He scanned the crowd idly. He spotted Caroline standing off to the side near the back with her small team. He nudged his colleague Gregory. "See that woman over there? The one in the gray suit," he said with a condescending chuckle. "That's my ex-Caroline, still plugging away. Good for her. At least the alimony is going to a dedicated employee." Gregory grunted, more interested in the free coffee. Damien felt a familiar flicker of satisfaction. Seeing her there, just another face in the corporate crowd, validated his decision to leave her. She was a cog in the machine. He was a master of the universe. Their orbits were, and always would be, galaxies apart. A hush fell over the room as Alistair Finch, in his capacity as interim chairman of the board, walked to the podium. "Good morning, everyone," Alistair began, his voice resonating through the atrium. "We are here today at a pivotal moment for Sterling Thorne. As you know, Robert Morrison is stepping down after a long and distinguished career. The board has undergone an exhaustive search for a new leader. We sought not just a manager, but a visionary. Not just a successor, but a revolutionary." Damien stifled a yawn. He already had a congratulatory text message drafted for Davenport. We needed a leader with an unparalleled understanding of market dynamics, a relentless drive for innovation, and the courage to steer this great firm into the future. Alistair continued, his eyes scanning the crowd. "We found that leader. It is my distinct honor and profound pleasure to introduce you to the new Chief Executive Officer of Sterling Thorne Capital." Damien straightened his tie, ready to applaud. Jenna was already looking toward William Davenport, who was sitting in the front row, a self-satisfied smile on his face. Ms. Caroline Abbott. The name hung in the air for a fraction of a second, a sonic boom that preceded the shockwave. A collective audible gasp rippled through the atrium. For a moment there was complete stunned silence. Damien's brain failed to process the words. It was as if he'd heard a foreign language. Caroline Abbott. It had to be a mistake. A different Caroline Abbott. He looked wildly toward where he'd seen her, but she was no longer there. Then from the side of the stage she emerged. She was not the hesitant, heartbroken woman he had divorced. She was not the quiet analyst he had just mocked. The woman who walked to the podium was radiating a calm, formidable authority. Her simple gray suit now looked like armor. Her posture was perfect, her expression serene but unyielding. She moved with a purpose that seemed to command the very air around her. The stunned silence erupted into a cacophony. The camera flashes began to fire a storm of strobing lights, all aimed at her. The journalists were shouting, scrambling. The employees were turning to each other, their faces a mixture of disbelief and dawning excitement. Damien stood frozen, his mouth slightly agape. His mind was a maelstrom of confusion and denial. CEO, CEO. The word echoed in his skull. Little, quiet, sensible Caroline. The woman he had patronized, belittled, and discarded. The woman he had condescendingly called a dedicated employee, not 5 minutes ago. He looked at her on the stage as she shook Alistair's hand. The power dynamic of the universe had just fundamentally, grotesquely shifted. She wasn't just a cog anymore. She was the entire machine. He wasn't a master of the universe. He was a lawyer whose firm was a vendor to the company she now ran. He was in an instant utterly insignificant. Jenna tugged on his arm. "Damien, isn't that?" Her voice was thin, confused. Damien couldn't answer. A cold dread heavier and more profound than anything he had ever felt was creeping up his spine, wrapping itself around his heart. The smirk was gone from his face, replaced by a pallor of sheer, unadulterated shock. The world had just turned upside down, and he was on the bottom looking up at the woman he had so gleefully tried to crush under his heel. He was watching his past rise up and become his future, and he was terrified. The aftermath was a brutal, slow-motion demolition of Damien's world. The news of Caroline's appointment exploded across the financial world. It was the story of the year, the unforeseen queen of sterling thorn. From analyst to CEO, the meteoric rise of Caroline Abbott. Her face was on the cover of Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. She was hailed as a genius, a visionary, the fresh blood that a sclerotic Wall Street desperately needed. And in every article in the fine print of her biography was the inevitable damning detail: Ms. Abbott is the former wife of prominent attorney Damien Vance. His name, once his greatest source of pride, was now forever linked to hers, but as a footnote. He was no longer the star of his own story. He was a supporting character in hers. The schadenfreude at his law firm was thick and palpable. His colleagues, who had once envied his success and his beautiful new partner, now looked at him with a mixture of pity and contemptuous amusement. Gregory, the man he had mocked Caroline to, now avoided his gaze. Whispers followed him down the hallways. Jokes were made at his expense over lunch, just quiet enough for him to not be able to confront anyone. Can you imagine he overheard one junior associate say by the coffee machine? He divorced her, and now she's one of the most powerful women in the country. He must be kicking himself so hard he can taste his own shoe leather. His clients, men and women who prized power and perception above all else, began to treat him differently. The easy camaraderie was gone, replaced by a subtle, clinical distance. They saw him not as a peer, but as a man who had made a catastrophic miscalculation. He had held a winning lottery ticket in his hand and had thrown it away because he thought it was just a piece of paper. If his judgment was that poor in his personal life, how could it be trusted in their multi-million-dollar legal affairs? Jenna was the first true crack in his crumbling facade. The foundation of her attraction to Damien had been his power, his status, his unshakable confidence. But that man was gone. In his place was a shell-shocked, irritable, and increasingly desperate man. He was consumed by Caroline's success, obsessively reading every article about her, muttering to himself about how she could have possibly done it. It must have been Finch he'd rant, pacing their pristine white apartment. She could never have done this on her own. She manipulated him. She must have. Jenna, who had once hung on his every word, now looked at him with a clinical detachment. The powerful king she had admired had been dethroned, and his replacement was a bitter, resentful man. The allure was gone. The red dress from the gala now seemed garish. The Miami vacation pictures pathetic. She started spending more time out with her own friends, her replies to his texts becoming shorter and less frequent. The final humiliating confrontation came 2 weeks after the announcement. Driven by a toxic cocktail of rage and wounded pride, Damien managed to get past Caroline's new phalanx of executive assistants and corner her in the hallway outside her new cavernous office. "Caroline." He called out, his voice sharp. She turned. She wasn't wearing the gray suit of the announcement, but a chic tailored black dress that spoke of effortless authority. She looked at him not with anger or pity or even triumph, but with a cool, professional indifference. It was the look one might give a junior vendor who had shown up unannounced. "Damien," she said, her tone level, "you should have made an appointment." "An appointment?" He sputtered, incredulous. "I don't need an appointment to talk to you. We were married for 10 years. "Yes, we were," she replied calmly. "And now we are not. If this is a personal matter, I'm afraid I'm very busy. If this is a professional matter concerning your firm's business with Sterling Thorne, please direct your inquiries to our head of legal." Her dismissal cut him deeper than any insult could have. She was placing him in a box, categorizing him, handling him. He was just another problem to be delegated. "Don't you dare do this, Caroline," he hissed, stepping closer. "Don't you dare pretend you did this all on your own. You think I don't know what this is? This is about me. This is all some pathetic revenge fantasy." Caroline looked at him, and for the first time he saw a flicker of emotion in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It was a distant, almost academic curiosity. "You still don't get it, do you?" she said, her voice soft but laced with steel. "You think the world revolves around you, that my successes and failures are all just a reaction to you. The most motivating thing you ever did for me, Damien, was showing me exactly who you were that night at the gala. You revealed that my marriage was a lie and that I had been dedicating my life to a man of hollow character. So I decided to dedicate my life to something real instead, to myself, to my work." She paused, letting the words sink in. "This was never about you. You were just the catalyst. You were the dead weight I had to cut loose before I could finally start to climb." With that, she turned and walked into her office, the large wooden doors closing softly but definitively behind her. Damien stood alone in the hallway, the echo of her words ringing in his ears. Dead weight. The term he had privately used for her was now being thrown back in his face. In that moment, the last vestiges of his arrogance shattered, leaving behind the raw, ugly truth. He hadn't traded up. He had been the one holding her back. His entire identity, built on the belief in his own superiority, was a fraud. He was nothing. And she, the woman he had thrown away, was everything. The reign of Caroline Abbott at Sterling Thorne Capital was nothing short of transformative. She moved with a speed and decisiveness that left the old guard breathless. Project Chimera was fully funded and implemented, diversifying the firm's portfolio and yielding staggering returns. She poached top talent from rival firms' brilliant minds who were drawn to her vision and her calm, data-driven leadership. She wasn't a screamer or a tyrant. Her authority was absolute precisely because it was quiet. She commanded loyalty, not through fear, but through sheer, undeniable competence. The stock price, which the board had feared would plummet, soared to historic highs. Caroline, the person, remained an enigma to the public. She rarely gave interviews, and when she did, she spoke only of the firm's strategy and its future. She deflected all questions about her personal life and her ex-husband with an icy grace that discouraged repetition. Her private life remained just that, private. She had her small circle of trusted friends like Olivia and her work. For now, that was enough. She was no longer healing, she was whole. Damien's downfall, in contrast, was a slow public spectacle. A few months after their hallway confrontation, he lost his biggest client, a tech billionaire, who explicitly moved his accounts to Sterling Thorne, requesting a personal consultation with the firm's new CEO. The message was clear. The loss was a major blow to Damien's firm and a fatal one to his career there. He was quietly pushed out, allowed to resign to pursue other opportunities, the corporate euphemism for being fired. The same week, he came home to their apartment to find Jenna's closets empty. A single note was left on the marble countertop. "I'm sorry, Dee. This isn't working. I need to be with someone who is going somewhere. A month later, her Instagram featured a new man, a silver-haired European shipping magnate. She had found her new king. Damien was adrift. His reputation was in tatters, his relationship was over, and the wealth he had fought so ruthlessly for was beginning to dwindle. He sold the large house he had once shared with Caroline, a painful admission of his diminished status. He was a ghost in a city that had once been his kingdom, haunted by the specter of his ex-wife's success. He would see her face on magazine covers at the newsstand or hear her name mentioned with reverence on financial news networks, and each time it was like a fresh turn of the knife. One crisp autumn evening, a year after she had taken the helm, Caroline stood in her office looking out at the glittering expanse of the city skyline. It was the same view Damien had once lorded over her, but it looked different from this height, from this perspective. It wasn't a symbol of conquest. It was a map of possibilities. Her assistant buzzed. "Ms. Abbott, your car is ready." "Thank you, I'll be down in a moment," she replied. Before leaving, she glanced at her desk. Beside a stack of market reports lay an invitation. It was to the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala. This year she was the event's honorary chair. A small, genuine smile touched her lips for the first time that day. She thought of Damien not with anger or bitterness, but with a strange detached sense of pity. He had been so desperate to prove his worth to the world that he had never bothered to cultivate any within himself. His life had been a performance, and without an audience he had simply ceased to exist. Her success wasn't the revenge she had sought. It was the life she had earned. The humiliation at that gala a lifetime ago had felt like an ending, but it had been a violent, necessary beginning. It had burned away the life she thought she wanted, revealing the far more extraordinary one she was capable of building. She switched off the light, leaving the city lights to illuminate her office. As she walked toward the elevator, she didn't look back. Her gaze was fixed firmly on the future, a future she was building not in reaction to anyone else, but entirely magnificently on her own terms. The shattered pieces of her old life were long gone, replaced by the unshakable foundation of a new reign. The grand ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel was a universe of its own, a swirling galaxy of champagne flutes, diamond earrings, and calculated smiles. A year ago, Caroline had entered this room and felt its gravity threaten to crush her. She had been a ghost, a loose thread in a tapestry she was no longer part of. Tonight she was the sun, and the entire room orbited her. As the honorary chair of the Children's Hospital Foundation Gala, she had spent the first hour graciously navigating a sea of admirers. People who had once offered her looks of pity now grasped her hand with reverent enthusiasm. They didn't just want to be seen with her. They wanted to absorb some of the Midas touch aura that now surrounded her. Sterling Thorne's unprecedented success under her leadership had become the stuff of legend on Wall Street, and its CEO was treated with the deference once reserved for royalty. She saw Mr. Harrington, the portly lawyer, who had so crudely congratulated Damien on trading up. He practically scuttled towards her, his face flushed with champagne and sycophantic zeal. "Ms. Abbott, Caroline." "A triumph," he boomed, gesturing vaguely at the opulent room as if she were responsible for its very existence. "What you've done with Sterling Thorne is simply magnificent. A true visionary. I always knew you had it in you. Always." Caroline offered him a serene, impenetrable smile. "Thank you for your support of the hospital, Mr. Harrington. Every contribution makes a difference." She gracefully disengaged before he could continue his revisionist history, moving towards the main stage where Alistair Finch and Olivia were waiting for her. "Holding up okay?" Olivia asked, her eyes sparkling. She looked radiant in an emerald green dress, a stark contrast to the somber navy she had worn the year before, as if mirroring Caroline's own transformation. "I'm fine," Caroline said, and she meant it. The fawning wasn't satisfying, but it wasn't irritating either. It was simply data. A reflection of her changed status in this ecosystem. It's just noise. Well, the noise has raised over $5 million tonight, largely because your name is on the invitation, Alistair noted with a proud smile. Now are you ready for your speech? She nodded, took a deep breath and walked to the podium as the room fell into a respectful hush. The glare of the spotlights was warm and intense, momentarily blinding her to the hundreds of faces in the darkness. She began to speak. Her speech wasn't about finance or corporate strategy. It was about potential. She spoke of the children in the hospital, tiny fighters, who with the right care and the right chances could grow up to change the world. She spoke of the importance of seeing value where others see only risk, of investing in futures that aren't yet obvious. She never mentioned her own story, but the subtext was unmistakable. It was a speech about second chances, about resilience, about the quiet strength that blossoms in the wake of devastation. As she reached her closing remarks, her eyes, now adjusted to the light, scanned the vast room. And that's when she saw him. He was standing near the back by a service entrance, half shrouded in shadow. It was Damien. He looked thin, his expensive suit hanging slightly off his frame as if it belonged to a larger, more confident man. He wasn't with anyone. He was utterly alone, a solitary island in the festive sea. She learned later he had come as the guest of a junior lawyer from a third-tier firm, a desperate attempt to cling to the periphery of the world he had once commanded. For a long, silent moment their eyes locked across the expanse of the ballroom. He saw her at the podium, bathed in golden light, holding the attention of the city's most powerful people in the palm of her hand. She was the architect of her own universe, eloquent, powerful, and serene. She saw him in the shadows, a ghost at a feast. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a hollow, haunted look. In his eyes, she saw the full, devastating calculus of his loss. He wasn't just looking at his ex-wife. He was looking at the living embodiment of his life's greatest mistake. He was staring into the abyss that separated what he had thrown away from what he was now. The room erupted in a thunderous standing ovation. The applause washed over Caroline, but for that one instant the only sound was the silent, shattering acknowledgement in Damien's eyes. There was no triumph in her heart, no sweet taste of revenge. There was only a profound quiet and final sense of closure. She felt a brief pang of pity for the small man he had become, for the potential he had squandered in his pursuit of a shallow reflection in a younger woman's eyes. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod, not of forgiveness, but of dismissal, an acknowledgment of a past that no longer had any power over her. Then she turned away, smiling at the cheering crowd, at Alistair, at Olivia. She turned back to her life. Later, as she was leaving the gala, a cool night breeze, a welcome relief. Alistair walked beside her. "You have a rare gift, Caroline," he said, his voice soft. "You've achieved a level of success that would make most people cruel or vain. Yet you seem to have only become more yourself." "I just learned what was worth fighting for," she replied, looking up at the clear, star-filled sky. "It was never about winning against him. It was about building something for me." Her car pulled up to the curb. She wasn't going back to a small, empty apartment this time, but to a home she had designed, a space filled with light art she loved and quiet contentment. The past was a closed book, its lessons learned. Her story was no longer a reaction to its painful first chapters. It was a tale of her own making, and the best parts she knew were still to be written. And that's the story of how one woman's darkest moment became the catalyst for her greatest triumph. It's a powerful reminder that our worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Caroline didn't set out for revenge, but by focusing on her own growth and talent, she achieved the ultimate victory, a life so successful that her toxic past became completely irrelevant. Damien's world shattered not because she attacked it, but because it was built on a foundation of ego and cruelty, and it simply couldn't withstand the weight of her incredible success. What did you think of Caroline's journey? Could you feel the chill in the boardroom when her name was announced? If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of resilience and second chances, please hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that the end of one chapter is often the beginning of a much better one. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story of justice and unexpected triumph.